My entire life, I haven't been able to understand inhumanity, racism and white privilege and voter suppression and segregation. I have to address this in my art. There is nothing more interesting than the human face. I don't know if it's an obsession or it's just they completely take over your life.
And the size of these, these are huge.
Large scale makes an impact.
And it's powerful and it's connected to our time.
What I really love about painting is color and the magic that you can do with color.
You know, there's no thumbnail cuticle on that police officer.
I think you're very selfish as an artist if you have to put all that detail in.
It's all like impasto.
It's nothing but marks. All I'm doing is making marks. Well, I'm going to tell you a little secret. When I make a painting, that's the first thing I paint. I've always been a bit of a rebel. Rejected, hung up my spurs, retired from my career, and applied to the San Francisco Art Institute. Introduces himself and asked me how long I'd been teaching. And I said, no, I'm a student just like you.
Hey everyone, so super excited to be sitting here in California in Sausalito. I'm about to dive into the world of Stephen Mangum, a realist California-based painter. Stephen's actually in my building and I moved my studio, so I'm just a couple doors down. So it's been a real treat to be going past the door and kind of peeking in. But recently, Stephen launched into a new body of work, and I can't wait to share that with you. And I haven't really had the download about what you're doing and what you're making. But thanks so much for just taking some time off here to fill us in. So
my pleasure.
Yeah, so you're a realistic painter, right? That's the right term, yeah?
That's correct.
Have you always been that? I'm just curious.
I think I've never been smart enough to understand abstraction.
Right.
No, from the very beginning, I've always been pretty much into realism.
And that was like, were you a kid doing realistic drawings, kind of like most kids?
Yeah. When I was a child, I was drawing a lot, and I've also always been attracted to figuration as well. And to me, there is nothing more interesting than the human face. And
that's like
so
I'm terrified of that, you know. That's like the one thing I would want to avoid is painting a human face. It's so great that you love it. Why?
So
Why do you love it so much? Like, I mean.
Well, just think of all the stories that it tells.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the amalgamation of experience and emotion that's captured in a face.
Yeah, and the eyes, like you got the. I know you're into the eyes because that's a big, huge piece of every one of your paintings.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little secret. When I make a painting, that's the first thing I paint. I start with the eyes and then work out.
Wow. Yeah. So you started out drawing. Did you go to art school? You grew up in
I grew up in Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah, right.
And I studied with an art teacher. I was in a small town in Mississippi. I studied with an art teacher. The town that I grew up in was so small we didn't have galleries or anything like that. We had a picture framing shop.
Oh yeah, those always double as the galleries. I know that.
And that's exactly how it worked. And I had an after-school job working at the frame shop because Mr. Free that owned the frame shop would put my art in the windows. And,
that's awesome.
And that's how I got started.
Yeah, and you get to see things coming in to be framed. You know, it's kind of it's kind of a soup, you know, a little bit. I worked at a frame shop too.
Yeah, did you really? Fantastic.
Yeah, when I was really young. So you went on to art school. I mean, you always knew.
I was studying with an artist, a very successful, regionally famous artist. Through my high school years, actually studying in his studio, and this guy was a master.
You stayed in his studio?
And I was studying in his studio, working in his studio, and then I guess maybe I was 17 or so. I went to the studio one day, and it was empty. Like everything was gone.
Wow.
And it's a bit of a long story. I won't go into it here, but he basically decided that he needed to quickly leave town one night, and he did, and he and his brother packed up everything in the studio, including my stuff, and left town.
What was it, like your paintings?
Even the canvas I was working on, my paints, my brushes, my easel, and so on.
How old were you?
17.
Wow, that must have just freaked you out. I mean,
so I stopped painting. That was 1970,
God, really?
1972. And I didn't paint again for 30 years.
So it was just like this guy that you had trusted. What happened? Do you think he was like a criminal or something? I mean,
no, he was a bit of a womanizer. And I think that perhaps he got involved with a married woman, and there was a jealous husband and some other things. But the guy was an amazing painter, though.
Did you see his work later popping up in galleries? Did you Google him? Is he still out there?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I wanted to collect his work later on. Now, let me just say that about 5 years after all this happened, a jealous husband did catch up with him and killed the guy.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was quite a colorful character. But I'd really encourage you to look up his artwork.
What's his name?
His name is DeWitt Jordan.
DeWitt Jordan. He's
DeWitt
obviously
Jordan.
dead now.
Yeah, he's been dead since 1977.
You have none of his work?
No.
Oh, man.
I
wonder what happened to your paintings,
But, well, they're collected.
I mean, your paintings that he took, like what was behind that,
No time to decide what was his and what was mine.
Oh, yeah.
Just grab everything, throw it in the back of a truck, and leave town as quickly as you can, yeah.
Wow. So then you, did you start doing this kind of more as a career, or has it been like a side thing? Or?
No, Nick, what happened was I go to the studio not expecting to find nothing. And there was nothing, and I thought, okay, what do I do now? Everything I've got is gone. All the paints that I had accumulated over years and brushes and so on. And so I thought, well, maybe I should be a writer. And because all I need is a pencil and paper.
That's all you had left.
So I thought, I'll express my creativity through writing. And I went to university, ostensibly to become the next great novelist. And I found out pretty much in the first semester that wasn't going to work out. So I ended up in business school.
What?
And went on to a completely different career.
Wow. What? I'm just curious. In tech, or
No, I was actually in department store retail on the financial side. And so I grew up. I spent my first 12 or 13 years with a department store in Washington, D.C. That was part of the May Department Stores chain, which is now, as everything else is, Macy's. And actually left there, and I went on. I was the CFO at Bloomingdale's.
Oh my God, I love that
I lived
store.
in New York City.
Oh wow, I love going to Bloomingdale's.
I was a suit in the department store business for many years, and then the way I got back to painting actually was during the first .com phase in San Francisco in the late 90s, when like money was growing on trees here. And I came to San Francisco to launch a .com, to become a billionaire. And we know how that story ended, with the bust. And but while I was here, I met who is now my wife, and we decided that we would take night classes at San Francisco Art Institute. And so after a 30-year hiatus, I started painting again.
Wow, what did that feel like? Do you remember? Was it like a yes right away, or?
Not even close. I thought for sure I'd walk in and remember everything and be great. Far from it. No, it was a lot had to be relearned.
Yeah, and then you started and you actually graduated. You went back to school for that.
So then we moved to Hong Kong. I was working for the luxury conglomerate LVMH.
Mm-hmm.
We moved to Hong Kong, but I continued to paint kind of as a hobby. And we were also collecting quite a lot of art. And I decided that my love of art needed to get back to making rather than buying art. And so I hung up my spurs, retired from my career, and applied to the San Francisco Art Institute.
Good for you.
And Nick,
Bold move.
On the day of my 60th birthday, I went for freshman orientation at SFAI.
Wow.
So
oldest guy in the class?
By far. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. Being a grown-up, I'm always punctual. I was first person in class. Another kid comes in and introduces himself and asks me how long I'd been teaching.
Oh.
And I said, no, I'm a student just like you.
And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
But awesome, look at the work. So is that, and then you just, that fired you off into it?
Yeah, well, I had, I'd always wanted to study painting, in a university setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured I better do it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So it was time.
Right. You've been painting faces. Now this is oil paint. You were
correct,
always doing oil paint, right?
Always oil.
And tell me a little bit about the process, and then I want to dive into kind of like what it is about. Like, I know you use photo reference, and obviously, but how do you customize that process? Like, what are the images that you, like, how long, these paintings take a long time. So you're like dating a painting for a long time. And I know the imagery it's a whole process for you.
I think what I really love about painting is color and the magic that you can do with color. It's not reproducing an image or making an exact copy. I don't really worry so much about likeness as much as I want to make it feel like it's alive. And to me, the beauty of oil paint is you have the ability to manipulate the material enough that you get that kind of result.
Because it's still kind of wet, and you can thin it, and
you can paint over, and you can do a number of things. Yeah.
So how do you go about, like, this body of work? And I mean, older work it's similar, but it was just mostly just portraits, but not regular portraits.
Right.
Tell me about that. Like, they're just something obstructing the portrait.
So when I decided I wanted to go to SFAI, obviously I needed a portfolio to apply. And at the time I went to visit the campus, I think I had 3 or 4 paintings that I had images of. And they said, well, we really need to see a body of work. And so I started painting portraits because that was kind of the easiest thing to do. Let me just paint all my friends, paint my wife, and that sort of thing. And I created all these portraits, and I found that I really enjoyed doing that.
Were they live? Like, are you sitting there working on them?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Then after I finished school, I had experimented with a number of different themes and subject matters in school, but I came back to the portraits, and I had good success with some large-scale portraits. What's on the wall behind these, which you may see another time. But I felt like something was missing. Portraits are portraits are portraits, and there are brilliant portrait artists out there.
Yeah.
But I've always been a bit of a rebel. I mean, I always wanted to do things my way and to be a little bit different. I was never one to wear the same clothes as everybody or drive the same car as everybody. So I wanted to find my own thing, and I was grasping for straws, and about to give up on the notion, and that's actually when I came up with these paintings here, where the faces, they're self-portraits, but they're obscured by things that are actually references to an earlier part of my life. And there's a story, there's a narrative behind all of them.
So
which
like
would
the pool balls relate to...
relate to the
but
fact
they don't
that I
relate
had
to
a
that figure, per se.
Yeah, well, they are metaphorical in the sense that that life is a game. And in that painting, for example, there are 2 solids, 2 stripes, but there's no 8 balls. So either the game is underway or maybe it's over. And that painting actually is about resignation. And I was at a very low point with my painting and about to give up, and I came up with this concept as a way of showing how I was feeling about life and my art and so on.
Right.
And so here I'm lying prone, ostensibly on a pool table, prone so that I'm vulnerable.
And you weren't trying to sell this work or anything?
No. I paint for myself.
Yeah.
But the pool balls were important because a lot of my misspent youth was in pool halls.
Wow.
I was in the town where I was studying with the black artist. I was also, at the age of 15, the 9-ball champion.
Wow. So you were logging time in that bar.
Yeah. So.
Do you still play?
Rarely. But so I was making that body of work, and that's it's not so much that it led to this, because this series had an inspiration unto itself. This was really a coming home for me.
And do you pose these photographs? I mean, so the pool balls are there, you're not grabbing things from different places, you just get a photo, and then how do you handle the color?
That's what I was saying about oil paint. You can, there's so much you can do with the color. You don't have to worry about matching color, and I've never been one to say it's got to be exactly the same. But for example, though, on this other painting here with the Rock'em Sock'em robots.
Yeah.
Okay, if you look right over here, you see the Rock'em Sock'em robots that I actually bought to use. Right. So, in a sense, that's a still life of those robots.
Is the work connected? Like why the robots? Is that sort of another narrative of your life?
Yeah, and
so
many
cool.
of these have meaning for me, and maybe for nobody else. But that one was particularly an outgrowth. This is after the election of 2016, and the robots. I was looking for a way to try to capture the divisiveness in the country and the lack of working across the aisle in the legislature. And so, I mean, it's pretty obvious it's Democrats and Republicans.
Wow.
And the expression on my face is to say, enough already, can't we figure this out?
Wow, so it's just these like kind of testimonies to how you're feeling at the time based on the culture. And now I'm curious, do you, when people see these, I mean, or do you, because you're not necessarily trying to sell them, are you promoting your work out there? Does that even interest you? I mean, you want to have people see your work, but...
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, more than anything, I just want people to see it. And so I'm pretty active in terms of entering competitions, exhibitions, and so on. None of this work is exactly gallery material.
Well, it depends which gallery, right?
Well, I guess it would, yes. But so, I make them for me, but I want to share them. And the only way I can do that is to get them included in exhibitions. And so the way to do that is through competitions.
How long do you spend on one of these paintings?
This one I just finished last Friday. Now, I only made a couple of marks last Friday after looking at it for a week and deciding I didn't like a couple of things about it. But I started it at the beginning of February. And but I think of actually applying paint is about 200 hours.
Wow.
But there's probably another 200 hours that went into planning it, reviewing it on a daily basis. Every day when I finish working, I take a picture, I take it home, bring it up on my iPad, study it.
And then sort of adjust it or think about it.
And then come in the next day and fix what I don't like.
Wow.
And then start moving forward again. Yeah.
God, that's just amazing. So tell us about this work. Are these your childhood photos?
Well, no, these are actually my grandchildren who make excellent models.
Oh.
But the story behind this series, this is now the 8th painting in the series, goes back to late 2018. My wife and I were at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington.
That's amazing.
And we're going through, and at the time I was making the large-scale portraits, but we go through the museum,
or whatever.
and we get to this one exhibit on Emmett Till. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Emmett Till, but Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black child from Chicago who was visiting his family in Mississippi.
Oh, right. He spoke to a white woman inappropriately, and they killed him, right?
They brutally killed him. And all this happened in my hometown.
Really? So how old were you?
Well, at the time that it happened, I was a toddler.
Yeah.
But when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I remember hearing a lot of talk about Emmett Till, but I never quite understood exactly the gravity of it all.
Wow.
And so, fast forward, 60 years, my wife and I are going through the museum, and we get to the exhibit on Emmett Till, and it just crushed me.
Wow.
And I came to know the entire story, and it was, it brought it all home. And I walked out of the museum ashamed of humanity.
Wow.
And it made such a mark on me that I thought, I have to address this in my art.
God, that is so powerful.
And so the first painting that I did in this series was a portrait of my oldest grandchild, Nola, painted on top of a portrait of Emmett Till. And it's actually this painting over here.
The behind the...
And the last one over there. And
right.
And
that was I looked that up, and it's a beautiful photograph. It's obscured a little because the way you've done it, but it was shot on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God, this kid was so young.
Well, and this was, the point of it was that I wanted to show that 60 years on, what was in the background of my life is still in the background of her life.
Yeah, right,
That we're still dealing with racism and white privilege and voter suppression and segregation and all these issues that grew up all around me. So I was, after coming out of the museum, I was trying to figure out how could I capture that to show that what was then is still now. And I decided on this notion of the transparency.
Yeah, that's what's so crazy.
And each one of the paintings, the background bleeds through the portrait in the foreground to show that the atrocities that were in the background of my life still permeate the present.
Oh, yeah, it's permeable, And these pictures of, this is the the innocent childhood, upper middle class.
Right.
Probably
White
what
privilege.
you had.
White privilege.
Yeah, what you had,
exactly.
and this was going on. So these are very modern today as well.
Right.
Like this is necessarily a vignette. I mean, this is all still happening.
Right.
That's the hard part.
And so
right?
when I did the painting of Emmett Till, and then I did 2 more paintings, which were Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King icons, with other grandchildren painted on top of them.
So these are your grandchildren?
These are all my grandchildren.
Wow.
And so I felt like those that were portraits on top of portraits were maybe in a sense paying homage to civil rights icons or important figures in the civil rights movement. But I wasn't sure I was registering as powerful a punch as I wanted to. And then I made this painting, which was very personal to me as well. This I call Illusions of My Childhood #4, Freedom Summer. And it references an incident that happened in 1964 when college student volunteers came down to Mississippi to register the black vote.
Oh.
And 3 of the volunteers disappeared. And the FBI put out a poster, searching for these individuals who turned up 6 weeks later, dead and buried.
Oh my God.
But I remember this event rather well. And so...
even though you were so young.
Even though, I was 10 years old at the time.
Wow.
And so I thought, this maybe brings the atrocity a little more front and center. But then I kept pushing it a little bit farther and a little bit farther. And I settled on finding these iconic images from the civil rights movement and using them as the background, and then painting my grandchildren as though they're superimposed on that.
Yeah.
So this image, for example, is from the Children's March in Montgomery, Alabama in 1963. And and they were just marching in general, a peaceful protest for civil rights, but some 2,000 children were rounded up and taken to jail. And so this particular image, which, like I said, is the 8th in the series, and I'm referring to it as Privilege, shows that what was, my pleasant childhood was very different from the childhood others were experiencing in the area.
Yeah, and how it just, it's such a great, and you just do these backgrounds and it's just black and white.
So these are painted in sepia. It's a pigment called sepia.
It doesn't look like sepia, the sepia that I know.
Well, sepia you think of as being brown because of the tint on photographs and so on. But it's a warm, dark pigment. And I paint them in sepia to suggest that it is an old photograph.
Oh, right.
But also to show that the limited palette is, again, metaphorical for the limitations of the experience and opportunity.
Well, they're very much community. Like memory, like
exactly.
What about, the Black Lives Matter movement and just how that came out? Were you making this work at that time? I mean, it must have just been like...
Well, I started, the first one I finished in September of 2019. So, and today, obviously, is the anniversary of George Floyd's killing.
Yes.
And I had finished the 5th painting, this painting, before that.
Wow.
If there was some informing or some way that I was impacted from the most recent, that is to elevate the element of the police brutality.
Mm-hmm. And the size of these, these are huge compared to what you've done in the past.
Large scale makes an impact.
Yeah, yeah. And you want to show these, right? I mean,
absolutely, yeah, for sure. I want to show them. Yeah, it's. I mean, as I said, I'm painting them for me. I mean, this is work, not so much that I want to make, but I feel like I have to make. I mean, this is. This is the story I have to tell. Mm-hmm. But I want to share the story.
What's been the reaction to these paintings? So have you put them out on Instagram or?
Yeah. I think that the adjectives or the descriptors that I hear are powerful, necessary, impactful, meaningful. There's a lot of thank you for making this, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, how much momentum do you gain from this audience? I mean, how do you interact with them? Is it just on Instagram, people are making comments? Or?
Yeah, I think that any feedback that you get as an artist certainly helps shape the work that you're doing, and if anything, it helps validate that I'm not wasting my time. It encourages me to keep going.
Oh, I'm sure. But I mean, it's like these paintings, we need this work. This is all, it's like the Truth and Reconciliation hearings in South Africa. It's like this is, do you think of this work as healing work?
It may be for me. I mean, I wanted to, well, let me say one thing though. Early on, when I was through the first 3 or 4, and I would submit them for exhibitions, and they were, rejected,
Really?
and I wondered if
they weren't ready.
If they weren't ready, am I wasting my time?
Wow.
Are they not registering? But I believed in it, and I stuck with it, and it took a while. But I have had much more success recently.
I'm sure.
With them, and I'll continue to make these. It may evolve into something new, but I can't see going to something else at this point. After we conclude, and I rearrange the studio to the condition it's normally in, I have stretcher bars in that big box over there on the floor. I'm stretching canvas later this week to start the next painting in the series, and I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's going to be impactful.
Do you work on one at a time then?
Oh, yeah.
Just one? Yeah. You don't have 3 going?
No, I don't know if it's an obsession or it's just they completely take over your life.
Wow. And you love these, it's really saturated, these colors. They're almost saccharine. I mean, is that, your color palette is that actually in all your work? I mean, talk about color. What is that for you?
Well, I love vibrancy. I love, really high key in color. To me, color is where the fun comes in. It's like values and form are the necessities. Color is where the fun comes in. That's where you can really take license and do the things you want to do. To register a visual impact, as well as to create, advancing and receding colors. Color can emphasize form, and I really love illusion. I like the feeling of space and to be able to reach in or reach around a painting. I really love that, and that's accomplished through through the manipulation of color.
Do you, I mean, if I was trying to do these pictures, I don't know if I would be able to have the skills to draw everything in the right proportion. Are you projecting a line drawing?
Yeah, I'll create the image, and I'll
on canvas,
and I'll project it,
oh,
and like mark the chin, the ears, and so on, and get where everything belongs.
You set up, you do it at night.
I used to graph.
Yeah, which would take forever. But you set up a projector at night.
Yeah.
And project on here, then
or even in the daytime.
You can kind of see it.
In the daytime, you can see it well enough. Yeah, because what you want to do is, I think of it as landmarks. I want to know that the eyes go there, and the mouth is this wide and that sort of thing, and just get that laid in. So I don't have to spend hours and hours and hours
I can't imagine.
doing a grid format. Gridding works fine if you're maybe 48 by 60, but this size it would just take too long.
And are you going through kind of archives, these photographs?
Oh.
You...
Hours, hundreds of hours,
Wow.
Thousands of photographs. I've got a few websites that are my go-tos for, that are great archives of civil rights imagery.
You're taking the snapshot. These are snapshots, but you're not. I mean, there's gruesome photographs, and there's beatings, and I know you've seen all that, but you're choosing to show a kind of almost. It's like there's a tension. There's just a tension. It isn't actually caught on fire in these pictures, and I'm curious what.
There's one that I did that after this painting, the painting that's behind it.
Oh.
Okay. Was tough. It's pretty hard, and in fact, there was one point as I was making the painting that I started crying.
Wow.
It was, and I can't imagine this painting ever finding a home because it's so hard to look at. It just it rips your heart out.
Is that a painting that's? So you've hidden it. But it's not buried under another painting. It's there.
It's there. It's
okay.
right behind this painting.
Wow.
And if I had more room in the studio, I would be showing it to you. But but it's a difficult painting to look at.
So you're in the libraries and you're in these going through these photographs, and you've been probably looking at these more than most people. Like, what have you learned, or is there a hope in this? I mean, how do you? I mean, this is dark, man. But I know you have faith here. You know?
I think there is hope. I don't know that these express hope. I think if anything, they say that we have to continue to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I frequently will use the hashtag when I put them on Instagram. The march continues. Mm-hmm. So the fight goes on. Mm-hmm. We've got to keep this front and center. Continue to work on this.
But this capacity for human beings to draw imaginary lines, between skin color or socioeconomic line, we all have this capacity, this dark potential in us. I mean, there's paintings like this you could make everywhere. I mean, not just, South Africa, but I mean, this is being played out in Maori, New Zealand, Australia, Aborigine, I see, in a way, I see this part of myself, the dark part, the fear part, the not trusting part.
Yeah. It's
small, and I don't have this kind of challenges. I'm privileged beyond belief, but do you see yourself in the darkness too?
Nick, I'm going to tell you a story, a short story, a quick one. You'll recall recently all of the chaos and the brouhaha about Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
A few months ago.
Yeah.
Well, there's a Dr. Seuss book. I can't believe I'm coming up with this, but there's a Dr. Seuss book called The Sneetches. And I have required all of my grandchildren to learn the story of the Sneetches. And it's a story about comparing ourselves to others, about being better than another class, or it's all about caste, racism.
Fear of the other.
Fear of the other.
Yeah.
And the story of the Sneetches has to do with, he refers to the star belly Sneetches that are cooler than the Sneetches that don't have stars on their bellies.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful story, but it's one that I remember from my childhood. And what I learned from that is that we're all the same. We look different, but we're all the same. We're just people. and none of us are better than the other. We're all just trying to get through this existence in a meaningful fashion, and to hopefully try to make the world a better place. I like to think that most people think that way.
Right.
But so that darkness, is out there, but I think it is born out of fear. But I think once you embrace diversity, you overcome that fear.
Yeah. One of the things that I struggle with is meaning in my work, and I thought and wished that my work could have this kind of gravitas, like this like there's a purpose here, and it's such a noble one, and it's powerful, and it's connected to our times, but a lot of us, me included, I'm just flinging paint around, and it's about me and journey, and there's metaphor in it and everything, but it's so different than this. And I wonder if you feel like there will be a time when you'll let this messaging go, and how much is message and purpose and is such a big part of your work, but do you sometimes wish that you could just put, though you say the color is the fun part, what does a Stephen painting look like that's just about color,
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, let me say one thing, that your work, all of our work as artists, we're putting ourselves out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that it took me a while to understand, to grow as an artist, is that you have to have the courage to overcome the fact that you're exposing yourself to the world, and you're putting, your blood and your sweat and your tears, of course, into everything that you do. You don't set out to make bad paintings. You try to make everything the best you possibly can.
Right.
And so that's a common denominator. We're trying to make the best work that we possibly can. I've always been a bit of a crusader. I said I was rebellious, but I've always been a bit of a crusader, and not a preacher, but my entire life I haven't been able to understand inhumanity. I just can't understand that. And so I feel like I have to work towards addressing that. And so I embrace this as a subject matter.
Yeah. And along with it comes creating form and magical realism and depth and, the surfaces you get, and it's just so beautiful. Abstractly, and I know you're working this close, and you're working from a distance, so you must get lost in that.
Well, there's a lot of up and back. I'm notorious about making a mark, walking back 15 feet and looking at it and going, well, that's not quite what I wanted, and walking back up and making it again. And I paint like this, wear myself out. It's just what I want to communicate, and this is the way I know to do it. This is my communication tool. I said I wanted to be a writer, and figured out I was going to fail at that. These are the stories, as I said, that I want to tell.
Yeah. When you're working on these, are you coming in at 8 in the morning and you work for 3 hours? How do you work on this work?
Get up in the morning, get my exercise done, take care of my mental and physical health first, which prepares you mentally then for what you're about to do. Then I'll typically spend an hour or so planning the work that I'm going to do. Then I get in here around 11 every day.
So you wait, before you come into the studio, you start thinking about what you want to do?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Really?
I said that I take an image of my work, every night.
Before you go home,
Before I go home, and I study that it's the last thing I look at before I turn the lights off. And it's the first thing I look at in the morning. And it's amazing how many things you solve while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
But and so I'm having my breakfast, and I'm looking at yesterday's image and figuring out what do I need to repair or do differently before I move forward. But I find that I'm good for about maybe 4 to 5 hours of actually applying paint, and then I just burn out. Then you find yourself getting a little bit
going
sloppy.
backwards a little. Yeah.
And,
that's a long time for one.
And once
painting
you
session.
come to that point, you have to step away.
Yeah. Like, understanding when it's done.
Yeah.
These are, there's so many areas you could finesse and work on, but they feel like everything is kind of treated the same in a way. There's not like you're leaving, it's not, and you can't see it, but when you're up close, it's quite loose and almost, what am I looking at? You're not one of these people that are just, there's no thumbnail cuticle on that police officer. The thumb looks like a soft pillow. I mean, but from a distance, it all kind of tightens up. I love that you get that. You learn that.
That's a personal thing. Yeah.
Is
that's yeah. I think that it is. I think you're very selfish as an artist if you have to put all that detail in.
Oh, interesting.
And I'd rather let the viewer be able to fill in some of the gaps. And so I like to approach it to paint just enough to make it convincing and stop.
Yeah, it's exactly where you stop. A little more loose, I think it would need to be tightened up, but it doesn't need to go tighter,
There is another thing that's important to me that I've has been part of my my mantra for many years, and it goes back to something that Monet said. And obviously, great impressionist painter, but Monet said you don't look at you don't paint a bottle. Don't think about the object you're painting. You look at shapes and replicate those shapes. And so when I'm painting, I don't think that I'm painting a hand, or I think I see a triangle and I paint a triangle.
Oh, interesting.
It's
like the drawing on the right side of the brain. You just get lost in that world, and it'll come out like you just trust it.
You have to. It's all about trust. And my wife hates it when I say this, because I always refer to it as it's nothing but marks. All I'm doing is making marks. And so the mantra is that I see shapes and I make marks that replicate those shapes. And you have to believe that in the end, it all comes together. And so to me, that's the difference between loose and tight painting.
Yeah, right.
Tight painting, it's
subject matter first.
Yeah.
And then, but you're almost abstracting it to make it look realistic. Yeah.
Like the windshield on this motorcycle, for example, I think of it as just blobs of paint.
I know.
But when you get away from it, and it works. And it's just enough to be a windshield.
And when you're starting these, you get these drawings and you just start laying it in. You're not glazing or anything. You're just building up the paint, or are you glazing some? Do you bring in the colors secondarily, or?
I do all these very directly. I paint it all at one time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, you mean like top left to bottom right, or just?
Well, no. So, for example, if you look at on this painting, you see the child's head that's embedded in the cheek of the portrait.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I didn't paint that head and then paint the face
over
it.
I noticed that.
Painted it all at once.
It's thick paint.
Yeah,
that transparency is opacity. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do it that I prefer, for this type of painting, I prefer to paint directly, do it all at once, because it frees you from the limitations of having to consider transparent versus opaque paints. So, for example, if I were painting indirectly and doing layers, I have to use successive layers of transparent paints on top.
Right.
And that's limiting. It gets a beautiful effect. I mean, it creates amazing luminosity.
But it becomes almost more like no part of this painting, even the background, is receding because it's glazed.
Right.
It's all like impasto, it's like
exactly,
thick.
yeah.
And that transparency that you're getting, it's not transparent at all, and I think that's a really interesting quality of your work. That, like, I'm looking at the girl's hand eating the ice cream, like,
Right.
if you just look at that hand, or it looks like, even this, it looks like a mutated hand, but then when you get back from it, you can see through it.
Yeah.
But usually transparency, it recedes. These don't.
Right.
That's segregation. It comes forward, which is really in your face more, which is appropriate for this. It all kind of comes up at the same level.
Well, and so when I said that, I really love what you can do with color. I love a warm palette. And so when I paint the children, those are very warm colors. I mean, you can see there's a lot of warmth in that, and I do that to make it pop out, to make it stand in front of the image behind, and that's exactly what you see there.
But yes, it stands out, but because it connects to the background, it's not too many feet in front of that, which I love.
Right.
You're controlling that. So I'm curious, these are really large. Do you think about going even bigger? Like what's coming up for you in these,
Okay.
This is like a 7 or 8 foot painting, right?
Yeah. So I'll tell you that when I conceived this one, I was originally going to do it 10 feet wide, 120 inches.
Wow.
And I went and measured the elevator. And
the elevator's 8.5 or something.
And it wouldn't fit, yeah.
Right.
So I had to go back to the drawing board and reframe it so that I could paint it 96 inches, which I knew I could safely get out of the building without having to take it off the stretchers. I would love to go bigger.
You could that's what I do. You can take this canvases off the stretcher bars and just roll it up and walk out the regular, go down the elevator.
Yeah.
But it's also hard to get for me, for an 8 foot by 8 foot, you can't bring in an 8 foot by 8 foot frame.
Right.
So I did it 6 by 8 and a 2 foot by 8, and then I put it together once I got it inside. So I've got the frame in the studio, but that's staying in there. Yeah. And then I take the canvas off and roll it up. So you can do something like that. Your ceiling height is good. And you have these bars, and you use these awesome easels. Are you lifting this up and down to work on the bottom? I mean, that's harder down there.
This easel has a winch on the back of it, so you can crank it up.
Okay.
And I do. I run it up and down depending on where I'm working on the painting. But before I got this, this was something that I stuck these 2x4s on the wall after I had bored the holes through it, and I made these pegs by buying dowels and putting rubber chair stoppers on it. I made those so I can move the pegs up and down the 2x4s.
Yes.
But it takes 2 people
to lift it up.
Yeah.
And you're using these are synthetic bristles.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Gamblin liquid as your medium. How are you finishing these paintings?
Well, I use the Gamvar for the varnish.
Oh, okay.
But, and I use Gamsol as a thinner. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I just use. I used to use another medium that, and I used it because it had a quick drying agent in it. But I found it was very inconsistent in terms of the finish on the paint. And so I've just gone back to using refined linseed oil.
Really? And that dries fast enough?
Oh, no, it doesn't dry fast enough. But if I need to, because I'm using a very, very toothy surface, you need to have the ability to work that paint into the tooth. And if it's too stiff, if the paint is too stiff, it's challenging. And I use... I'm a big fan of old Holland paints.
Oh, yeah.
And which to me are like painting with butter. I mean, they're fantastic. But I feel like I need to add just a little more oil to those as well.
Right.
To get them just the way I like to move them around.
Yeah. That's pretty... small brushes for such a large picture, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So just, you know, in wrapping up here, you know, I know people that fantasize about wanting to paint realistically, and there's so much to it. And these are just such, I mean, they're so impressive and they're so big. And what would be your advice for someone who's interested in learning realism? And like, are there things, did you start small? Did you learn life drawing? I mean, what are the things that moved you along that you could share with some of us?
Nick, I go back to the first art teacher that I worked with. And the first thing that we did, you know, you probably did the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. You start with the forms. You have a sphere, you have a cone, and you have a cube. And you get to where you learn form, light and dark, and how you transmit that. You learn that first, and then you go from there. After that,
everything's just related to that.
A compilation of that. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so you have to be able to deconstruct.
Right.
I mean, that's really the way
that's what you're doing.
Yeah, you're deconstructing it. You're seeing it in a smaller form rather than in the aggregate. Because if you say, I'm going to paint this hand, and you try to paint this hand, hands are very difficult to paint.
Yeah.
But if you say, okay, I'm going to paint this oval,
and then next to that is this part, and then all of a sudden you start to get it. Yeah.
Then it kind of works.
Yeah.
So I'd say think of it not so much in terms of what you're painting, but the form that underlies it.
It's so great because, you know, it's easy to, when we look at abstract painting, to talk about principles and abstraction.
Yes.
But I teach, you know, principles, and I'm always pointing at realistic work, but it's good realistic work. It's good painting that looks like nature. It is so, the abstraction of it is amazing. It has to be strong with its shapes and designs and value. And it also has to look like something. But when you combine all those, you end up with something like this, you know, as opposed to just meticulously copying a photograph that, you know. Yeah. Listen, thank you so much. This has just been really, really inspiring, your work and just your whole, the way you throw yourself into it and the emotion of it, it really comes through. It's really an honor to share this and talk to you about it. Thank you.
Well, you know, it's my pleasure. And have you ever met an artist that didn't like to talk about their work?
I don't know. I'm always surprised. It's, everyone, but everyone's just comes at this through, you know, ultimately what it is that there's always that, like, it's just heart. There's a lot of heart. And I think that's what I love about it. You know, I can picture you crying a little bit making that painting, because I've had experiences like that where it's like, oh my God, and you're by yourself, and this is like an amazing, extraordinary day.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Okay, my pleasure.